Every morning at exactly 6:30, Rosa climbed the service elevator to the 42nd floor of the glass tower that touched the New York sky. Her small hands gripped a worn canvas bag filled with cleaning supplies, and her quiet footsteps echoed softly in the marble hallway. She had been doing this same routine for 3 years now, yet her heart still raced a little when she turned the key to enter the penthouse that seemed bigger than her entire neighborhood back home. The apartment belonged to David Chen, a man who had made his fortune creating apps that millions of people used every day. Rosa had seen his picture in magazines left on the coffee table, always wearing expensive suits, always surrounded by important-looking people, always smiling, the kind of smile that came from never having to worry about money. But Rosa had never actually spoken to him beyond a polite good morning on the rare occasions their paths crossed. She preferred it this way. In her experience, rich people either treated you like you were invisible or watched your every move like you might steal something. David seemed to be the first type, which was fine by Rosa. She could do her work in peace, moving through the massive space like a shadow, making everything perfect before he woke up. The penthouse was like something from a movie. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city spreading out below like a glittering carpet. The kitchen had more gadgets than most restaurants, though Rosa noticed David mostly ordered takeout. There were 3 bedrooms, each bigger than the apartment Rosa shared with her teenage daughter, and enough bathrooms to serve a small hotel. But it was the music room that always made Rosa's breath catch in her throat. The room sat at the corner of the penthouse, with windows on 2 sides that let in the morning light. In the center, like a sleeping giant, stood the most beautiful piano Rosa had ever seen. It was a Steinway, black as midnight, and polished to mirror brightness. Rosa knew good pianos. She could tell from the way the wood grain flowed across its surface, from the perfect alignment of the keys, from the way it seemed to hum with potential even when silent. Every morning Rosa saved this room for last. She would dust the furniture carefully, vacuum the thick carpet, and clean the windows until they sparkled. But always, she found herself drawn to the piano. She would take out her microfiber cloth and polish its surface with the kind of care most people reserved for precious jewels. Sometimes when she was sure she was alone, Rosa would sit on the bench. The leather was soft and worn, probably worth more than she made in a month. She would place her hands just above the keys, not quite touching, and move her fingers as if she were playing. In her mind, she could hear the music, complex pieces, that made her soul ache with longing. The other members of the housekeeping staff thought Rosa was a bit strange. There was Carlos, who cleaned the lobby and always tried to make conversation. There was Mrs. Peterson, who handled the laundry and had opinions about everything. And there was Tony, the security guard who had worked in the building for 20 years and knew everyone's business. That Rosa, Mrs. Peterson, would whisper during their brief encounters in the service elevator. She barely says 2 words, always humming those sad songs. Carlos was kinder. He had noticed how Rosa's eyes lit up whenever she talked about her daughter, Isabella, who was 17 and dreamed of becoming a doctor. She works hard, he would say, sends most of her money home to family in Guatemala. I respect that. But none of them knew Rosa's secret. None of them knew that the quiet woman who scrubbed floors and folded sheets had once worn elegant gowns and played for audiences of thousands. None of them knew that her fingers, now rough from cleaning chemicals, had once danced across piano keys in concert halls across Central America. Rosa had learned to keep her past locked away like a photograph in a drawer. It was too painful to remember, and besides, who would believe her? She was just the maid now. It's just another immigrant woman doing work that others didn't want to do. In this new life, her musical training felt like something from a dream, beautiful, but not quite real. The hardest part was walking past music stores on her way home from work. She would see people through the windows, sitting at pianos, their faces concentrated and happy. Sometimes she would stop and listen to the faint sounds that drifted onto the street. Her hands would move unconsciously, fingering the melodies. She heard Isabella often asked why her mother never played piano anymore. Rosa had taught her daughter some basic songs when she was younger, using an old keyboard they had bought from a thrift store. But as the years passed and life became more about survival than dreams, the keyboard had been sold to help pay rent. "Music is a luxury we can't afford right now, Mia," Rosa would tell her daughter. Maybe someday, but someday felt very far. Away at David's penthouse, Rosa developed her own rhythm. She knew his schedule better than he did. Monday through Friday, he left at 7:30 sharp, usually talking loudly into his phone about meetings and deals. He rarely came home before 8 in the evening, giving Rosa plenty of time to work undisturbed. She learned his habits, his preferences, his moods from the small signs he left behind. When he was stressed, he drank more coffee and left empty cups scattered around his home office. When he was happy, he played music loudly from expensive speakers, usually electronic music that Rosa didn't understand, but that made her smile because at least it was music. The piano, though, remained silent. In 3 years, Rosa had never once heard it played. It sat there like a beautiful sculpture, admired but unused. Sometimes she wondered why David had bought it. Maybe it impressed his guests. Maybe he had intended to learn but never found the time. Maybe it was just another expensive thing to fill the expensive space. Rosa began to think of the piano as a friend, a companion who understood her secret sadness. When she polished its surface, she would whisper to it in Spanish, telling it about her day, about Isabella's grades, about the dreams she kept hidden. The piano seemed to listen, its strings occasionally vibrating softly when trucks passed on the street below, as if it were humming back to her. She developed little rituals around her cleaning. She would always start with the right side of the piano, working her way around. She learned every scratch, every reflection of light on its surface. She knew which keys looked like they had been touched recently, though that was rare, and which ones gathered dust, on particularly difficult days. When Rosa felt the weight of her double life, the person she used to be and the person she had to be now, she would rest her forehead against the cool wood of the piano and close her eyes. In those moments, she could almost hear the music she carried inside her, waiting patiently for its chance to be heard again. Rosa never imagined that her secret would one day be discovered. She never thought that her careful, quiet world would be turned upside down by a single moment of weakness. She simply cleaned and hummed and dreamed, believing that some things were better left buried in the past. But the past, like music itself, has a way of refusing to stay silent forever. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the city into a gray watercolor painting. Thursday evening brought the kind of downpour that made people run for cover and taxis disappear like magic. David sat in his office on the 35th floor of another glass tower, watching the water streak down his window while his business partner droned on about quarterly reports, his dinner meeting at the fancy steakhouse had been canceled at the last minute. Something about the client's flight being delayed due to the storm. David felt a strange sense of relief. He was tired of those dinners where everyone pretended to be friends while trying to figure out how to make money off each other. He could just go home, order some Chinese food, and maybe watch a movie. The ride home in his black car felt longer than usual. Traffic crawled through the flooded streets, and David found himself actually looking out the window instead of staring. At his phone, he watched people hurrying under umbrellas, saw the warm glow of apartment windows, and for a moment wondered what it would be like to live a simpler life. His driver, Luis, was unusually quiet. They had been working together for 5 years, and Luis usually had stories about his kids or opinions about the weather. But tonight he seemed focused on navigating the difficult roads, his hands steady on the wheel despite the challenging conditions. "Rough night to be out," David said, trying to make conversation. "See, Mr. Chen? Very bad weather. But we make it home safe. No worry," Luis replied, his accent thick with concentration. When they finally pulled up to David's building, the doorman rushed out with a large umbrella. The lobby was unusually quiet, with only the sound of rain hitting. The large windows and the soft classical music that always played in the background. David nodded to the night security guard and headed for his private elevator. As the elevator climbed toward the 42nd floor, David loosened his tie and thought about what he wanted to eat. Maybe Thai food instead of Chinese, or maybe he would actually cook something for once. He had a kitchen full of expensive appliances that he barely used. His mother always said he was wasting money on things he didn't need. And maybe she was right. The elevator doors opened to his private hallway. And David stepped out, already reaching for his keys. But as he approached his door, he heard something. That made him stop completely. Music was coming from inside his apartment. Not the electronic music from his sound system, but real music. Piano music. David's first thought was that he had left his stereo on, but he knew that wasn't right. He had a good memory for these things, and besides, he didn't own any classical music. Second thought was that someone had broken in, but that seemed impossible. The building had excellent security, and his door showed no signs of being forced. He slipped his key into the lock as quietly as possible and turned it slowly. The music grew louder as he opened the door. It was beautiful and sad at the same time, the kind of music that made you want to close your eyes and just listen. David had heard this piece before, probably in a movie or a commercial. He couldn't remember where. He set his briefcase down carefully and took off his shoes, not wanting to make any noise. The music was coming from his music room, which meant someone was actually playing his piano. David felt his heart beating faster as he moved through his apartment. Stepping lightly on the thick carpet, the hallway leading to the music room seemed longer than usual. With each step, the music became more complex, more emotional. Whoever was playing wasn't just hitting the right notes, they were telling a story. David could hear years of training in every phrase, could feel the musician's soul in every chord. He reached the doorway and carefully peered around the corner. What he saw made him forget to breathe. Rosa, his quiet maid, sat at his piano with her back to him. But this wasn't the Rosa he knew. This Rosa had her hair down, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. Her small hands moved across the keys. With incredible grace and power, her entire body swaying gently with the rhythm of the music. She was completely lost in what she was doing, unaware of anything else in the world. David had never seen anyone look so alive, so completely themselves. Rosa's face, which he had only seen in quick glimpses during their brief encounters, was transformed.
Oh.
Her eyes were closed, and there was a small smile on her lips. She looked like she was having a conversation with the piano, like they were. Old friends sharing secrets. The piece she was playing was incredibly difficult. David didn't know much about classical music, but he knew enough to recognize skill when he heard it. This wasn't someone who had taken a few lessons or learned from YouTube videos. This was someone who had dedicated their life to music, who had trained for years to reach this level. David found himself leaning against the doorframe, completely mesmerized. He had owned this piano for 2 years and had never heard it sound like this. When he bought it, the salesman had played a few notes and talked about its rich tone and perfect action. But David had never really understood what that meant until now. Under Rosa's hands, the piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a voice, singing with more emotion than most people ever expressed in words. The music rose and fell like ocean waves, sometimes gentle and contemplative, sometimes powerful and demanding. David recognized the piece now. It was Chopin, one of the ballads. He had heard it performed at a concert his ex-girlfriend had dragged him to, but it had seemed boring then. Now, listening to Rosa play it, he understood why people called Chopin a poet of the piano. As the piece reached its climax, Rosa's playing became more intense. Her hands flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision, and David could see the muscles in her arms and shoulders working. She wasn't just playing the music, she was living it, breathing it, becoming it. Then, suddenly as it had begun, the music started to wind down. The final notes hung in the air like drops of rain, slowly fading into silence. Rosa sat still for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, her head bowed as if she was saying a prayer. David didn't move. He was afraid that any sound would break. The spell would bring them both back to the real world where she was the maid and he was the boss. Where this moment would become awkward and complicated, but Rosa seemed to sense his presence. She turned around slowly, and when she saw him standing there, her face went completely white. Her hands flew to her mouth, and her eyes grew wide with fear. "Mr. Chen," she whispered, her voice shaking. I am so sorry. I know I shouldn't. I was just..." She stood up quickly, knocking over the piano bench in her haste. David watched as she scrambled to pick it up, her hands trembling as she tried to position it correctly. She was speaking rapidly in Spanish, words tumbling over each other in her panic. "Rosa," David said softly, stepping into the room. "Rosa, please, it's okay." But Rosa was already backing toward the door, shaking her head. "I lose my job. I know I lose my job. Shouldn't touch your piano. I clean only, not play." "I'm so sorry." "Mr. Chen?" "Rosa? Wait," David said. But she was already rushing past him, grabbing her cleaning supplies from the hallway closet. He heard her say something about never coming back, heard the front door slam, heard the elevator ding as she escaped down to the lobby. David stood alone in his music room, staring at the piano bench that Rosa had been sitting on just moments before. The silence felt heavy after such beautiful music. He walked over to the piano and gently touched the keys she had been playing, but they only made small, empty sounds under his inexperienced fingers. For the first time in years, David felt like he had missed something important. He had been living in the same space as this incredible talent for 3 years and had never known it existed. He thought about all the mornings Rosa had cleaned this room. All the times she had probably looked at this piano and wanted to play it. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for the building's management company. But when someone answered, he realized he didn't even know Rosa's last name. He had been employing her for 3 years, and he didn't know her full name, didn't know where she lived, didn't know anything about her except that she was quiet and did excellent work. As he stood there in the silence, David made a decision. Tomorrow he would find Rosa. He would learn her story. And somehow he would convince her that she didn't need to run away from her gift anymore. David couldn't sleep that night. Kept hearing Rosa's music in his head, seeing the look of terror on her face when she realized he had been watching. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her hands moving across the piano keys with such incredible skill and passion. How had he missed this? How had someone with such extraordinary talent been invisible to him for 3 whole years? The next morning, David did something he had never done before. Instead of leaving for work at his usual time, he waited. He sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee, watching the clock and listening for the sound of the service elevator. At exactly 6:30, he heard the familiar ding, followed by quiet footsteps in the hallway. But the footsteps stopped. David waited, but Rosa didn't use her key to enter the apartment. After 10 minutes, he heard the elevator again, and then silence. She had come up, stood outside his door, and left without coming in. David felt a strange panic. What if she never came back? What if he had scared her so badly that she would quit without explanation? He grabbed his phone and called the building management office. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," came the cheerful voice of Patricia, the building manager. "Can I help you today?" "I need to contact one of my housekeeping staff," David said, realizing how awkward this sounded. "Rosa ... I don't actually know her last name. She's been cleaning my apartment for 3 years, but I need to speak with her about something important." There was a pause. "Oh, you mean Rosa Morales. Is there a problem with her work? She's one of our most reliable employees." "No, no problem at all. Quite the opposite, actually. Could you give me her contact information? I really need to speak with her." Patricia hesitated. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but we can't give out personal information about our employees. However, I could pass along a message if you'd like." David thought for a moment. "Could you tell her that? She's not in trouble? That I just want to talk to her? Tell her it's about music?" An hour later, David's phone rang. The voice on the other end was so quiet he could barely hear it. "Mr. Chen, this is Rosa. Patricia said you want to talk to me about music." "Rosa? Yes. Thank you for calling. Are you free to come up? I promise you're not in trouble. I just ... I need to understand what I heard last night." There was a long silence. Finally, Rosa said, "I come up, but only for a few minutes. I have other jobs today." When Rosa arrived, she looked different from the confident musician David had seen the night before. She stood by the door, her cleaning bag in her hand, ready to run if necessary. Her eyes were red, and David realized she had probably been crying. "Please, sit down," David said, gesturing toward the living room couch. Would you like some coffee? Water? Rosa shook her head and perched on the edge of the couch like a bird ready to take flight. Mr. Chen, I'm very sorry about last night. I know I shouldn't use your piano. I just... ... Sometimes I need to play, you know? It helps me remember who I used to be. Who you used to be? David sat across from her, leaning forward. Rosa, what I heard last night. That wasn't someone who just plays piano as a hobby. That was someone who has spent years training. Someone who is truly gifted. Where did you learn to play like that? Rosa's hands twisted in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was barely above. A whisper. In my country, Guatemala, I was a professional musician. I played with the National Symphony Orchestra in Guatemala City. I studied at the conservatory there, and before that I had private teachers since I was 5 years old. David felt his jaw drop. You were a professional pianist? With a symphony? Orchestra. Rosa nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. My whole life was music. I played solo concerts, I recorded albums, I taught at the music school. Music was everything to me. But then, she stopped, her voice catching. What happened? David asked gently. Rosa took a shaky breath. My husband, Miguel, he was a journalist. He wrote stories about corruption in the government, about drug cartels, about things that powerful people didn't want anyone to know. We knew it was dangerous, but Miguel said the truth was more important than safety. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. One night, men came to our house. They told Miguel to stop writing, to stop asking questions. But Miguel was stubborn. He said he couldn't stay quiet when people were suffering. David waited, sensing that Rosa needed time to find her words. 2 weeks later, Miguel was driving home from the newspaper office. Someone shot him at a traffic light. The police said it was a robbery, but nothing was stolen. His computer was still in the car, his wallet was still in his pocket. He knew it wasn't a robbery. Rosa's voice broke completely now. I was scared. Not just for me, but for Isabella. She was only 12. Then, just a little girl. Miguel's editor told me that I might be in danger too, because I was Miguel's wife. He said the people who killed Miguel might think he had told me things, secrets that could hurt them. David felt sick to his stomach. He had never imagined that Rosa carried such a tragic story. So you left Guatemala? You left everything, Rosa, said her voice growing stronger with the telling. I sold my piano, my music collection, everything we owned. I took Isabella, and we came to the United States with just 2 suitcases and the hope that we could build a new life here. But your music career, ... But it was a bitter sound. What music career? It's Guatemala. I was Rosa Morales, concert pianist. Here I am, just another immigrant woman with no papers, no way to prove what I used to be. My diplomas mean nothing here. My recordings, my concert programs, my reviews in the newspapers, none of it matters if you can't legally work in this country. David was beginning to understand the full picture. So you took whatever jobs you could find. At first I worked in a restaurant kitchen, washing dishes. Then I cleaned office buildings at night. Eventually I found work cleaning homes because the pay was better and I could work during the day while Isabella was at school. I've been doing this for 5 years now. But Rosa, your talent. Surely someone must have recognized. Who would recognize it? Rosa asked, a flash of anger in her voice. The people I work for, they don't see me as a person with a past, with dreams, with skills. They see me as the maid. I am invisible to them, which is fine because I need the work. But sometimes when I see a piano like yours, I remember who I used to be, and it hurts so much I can barely breathe. David felt ashamed. He realized he had been exactly like those other people, seeing Rosa as just the person who cleaned his home. Never wondering about her story, her dreams, her pain. The music you played last night, he said quietly. It was incredible. I've never heard anything so beautiful. Rosa's expression softened slightly. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was the first piece I ever performed with. The symphony, when I was 19 years old. I still remember how nervous I was, how the conductor smiled at me when I finished. That was one of the happiest days of my life. You still have your music? Your sheet music, I mean? Some of it. I brought a few pieces with me when we left Guatemala. In a box under my bed, along with some photos from my concerts. And a few recordings. Isabella likes to look at the pictures sometimes. She says I look like a different person in them. You're a different person, David said. But that person is still there, isn't she? I heard her last night. Rosa looked directly at him for the first time since she had arrived. Yes, she's still there. But she's like a ghost now. Someone who only comes out when no one is watching. I can't afford to be that person anymore, Mr. Chen. That person had dreams, had ambitions. This person, the person I am now, she just needs to survive and take care. Of her daughter? David leaned back in his chair, processing everything Rosa had told him. Here was a woman of extraordinary talent who had been forced to hide her gift because of circumstances beyond her control. She had lost her husband, her career, her entire life, and had somehow found the strength to rebuild from nothing. Rosa, he said finally, what if I told you that you didn't have to choose between surviving and being who you really are? What if there was a way to be both? Rosa looked at him suspiciously. What do you mean? David wasn't entirely sure what he meant yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Couldn't let Rosa's incredible talent remain hidden. Somehow, some way, he was going to help her find her way back to the music that clearly meant everything to her. For 3 days after their conversation, David couldn't stop thinking about Rosa's story. He found himself distracted during meetings, staring out windows and imagining what it must have been like for her to give up everything she loved. He kept picturing her sitting at his piano, playing with such passion. And then the fear in her eyes when she thought she would lose her job. David had always considered himself a good person, someone who treated people fairly. But Rosa's story made him realize how blind he had been. He lived in a world where talent was celebrated and rewarded, where people with skills could build careers and achieve their dreams. He had never really thought about people who had those same talents but couldn't use them because of circumstances beyond their control. On Saturday morning, David made an unusual decision. Instead of going to his usual gym and then spending the day working from home, he drove to a part of Queens he had never visited before. He had looked up Rosa's address in the building management files, something he probably shouldn't have done. But his curiosity was stronger than his sense of proper boundaries. The neighborhood was nothing like his Manhattan penthouse. Small apartment buildings lined busy streets filled with shops that advertised in Spanish. Children played on sidewalks while their parents chatted with neighbors. There was a warmth here, a sense of community that David's wealthy neighborhood lacked. Despite its luxury, he didn't approach Rosa's building that would have been too strange and invasive. Instead, he sat in his car and watched the neighborhood come alive. He saw families heading to a nearby church, teenagers playing soccer in a small park, elderly people sitting on stoops and talking. These were real people living real lives, and for the first time, David understood that Rosa had a whole world outside of his penthouse. As he drove home, an idea began to form in his mind. It was risky and probably crazy. But David couldn't shake the feeling that he had been given an opportunity to do something meaningful with his wealth and connections. That evening, David started making phone calls. His first call was to his friend Jennifer, who served on the board of Lincoln Center and organized charity events for wealthy New Yorkers. "David, how nice to hear from you," Jennifer said in her polished voice. "It's been too long since we've seen you at any cultural events. Are you finally ready to start supporting the arts?" "Actually, Jennifer, that's exactly why I'm calling. I want to host a private concert at my apartment, something intimate, maybe 30 or 40 people. I have a pianist I'd like to showcase." "How wonderful. Anyone I would know? Is it someone from Juilliard?" David hesitated. "It's someone very special, but not well known here in New York. I think your friends would be amazed by her talent. The thing is, I'd like to make it a fundraising event too, maybe for music education programs for underprivileged kids." Jennifer's interest was clearly piqued. "That sounds lovely, David. You know how much my crowd enjoys discovering new talent, especially for a good cause." "When were you thinking?" soon David said. "Maybe in 2 weeks." After he hung up with Jennifer, David realized he hadn't even asked Rosa if she would be willing to perform. He was getting ahead of himself, making plans that involved her without her consent. but he couldn't help feeling excited about the possibility. The next Monday, David waited for Rosa again. This time, she came to the apartment, but she was clearly nervous. She moved through her cleaning routine quickly and efficiently, avoiding the music room entirely. "Rosa," David called out when he heard her preparing to leave. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" She appeared in the doorway of his home office, looking worried. "Yes, Mr. Chen. I have an idea I want to discuss with you. But first I want you to know that whatever you decide, your job here is secure. You're not going to lose your position no matter what you say to my proposal." Rosa relaxed slightly, but David could see she was still wary. "What kind of proposal?" "I want to host a concert here in my apartment. A small private event with some friends and colleagues, and I want you to be the featured performer." Rosa's face went pale. "Mr. Chin, I don't understand. You want me to play piano for your friends?" "Yes, but not as your employer asking a favor. I want to hire you as a professional musician. I want to pay you properly for your performance, and I want to introduce you to people who could help restart your music career." Rosa sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. "You don't understand? I haven't performed for an audience. In 6 years, I'm just a maid now. Your friends, they are important people, rich people. They will see right through me." David leaned forward, his voice gentle but determined. "Rosa, talent like yours doesn't disappear. What I heard the other night was extraordinary. These people aren't just rich. Many of them genuinely love and support music, donate millions of dollars to orchestras and music schools. If they hear you play, they'll recognize your gift immediately. But what if I make mistakes? What if I forget the music? What if they ask me questions about my background?" Rosa's voice was rising with anxiety. "Then you tell them the truth. Tell them you're a trained musician from Guatemala who has been working hard to build a new life in America. You tell them that music is your passion and your calling. There's nothing shameful about your story, Rosa. If anything, it makes your talent even more remarkable." Rosa was quiet for a long time, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Finally, she looked up at David. "Why are you doing this? Why do you want to help me?" David had been asking himself the same question. "Honestly, because I feel guilty. Been working in my home for 3 years, and I never really saw you as a person with your own dreams and abilities. Treated you like you were invisible, because I think it's wrong that someone with your talent should have to hide it because of circumstances that weren't your fault. What if it doesn't work? What if your friends don't like my playing? Then at least you'll have tried, and you'll still have your job here, just like always. But Rosa, what if it does work? What if this is the chance you've been waiting for?" Rosa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Isabella doesn't know about my music career. I mean, she knows I used to play piano, but she doesn't know how serious it was. It's been trying to protect her from feeling sad about the life we lost." David was surprised. "She doesn't know her mother was a professional pianist. She was so young when we left Guatemala, and we've never talked much about the past. I thought it would be easier for her if she focused on the future instead of missing what we used to have. But now, if I do this concert, she'll have to know the truth." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," David said gently. "Maybe she would be proud to know how accomplished her mother is." Rosa turned back to face him. "If I agree to do this, and I'm not saying yes yet, what exactly would happen?" David felt a surge of hope. "I would invite about 30 people to my apartment for an evening concert. You would perform for maybe an hour, playing whatever pieces you choose. I would introduce you as a talented pianist, and I would make sure everyone knows this is a professional performance, not entertainment from the hired help. And the fundraising part, that's entirely up to you. If you want, we could ask for donations to support music education programs for immigrant children, or we could support any cause that's important to you. The point is to show that you're not just performing, you're using your talent to help others." Rosa was quiet again, and David could see her mind working through all the possibilities and fears. "How much time would I have to prepare?" "As much as you need. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever makes you feel ready." "I would need to practice a lot. I haven't played seriously in years. You can practice here anytime you want." Morning, evening, weekends. Consider this piano yours to use. Rosa looked toward the music room, and David could see longing in her eyes. The pieces I know best are the ones I performed in Guatemala. They might seem old-fashioned to your friends. Classical. Music is never old-fashioned to people who truly appreciate it. Play what speaks to your heart, Rosa. Play the music that reminds you of who you are. After what felt like an eternity, Rosa nodded slowly. I need to think about it. I need to talk to Isabella. This decision affects both of us. Of course, take all the time you need. As Rosa gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. Mr. Chen, if I do this, there's one condition. Name it. Whatever money people donate, I want it to go toward buying instruments for schools that can't afford them in Guatemala. I had students who were incredibly talented but couldn't afford their own instruments. They had to share old, broken pianos and guitars. Music shouldn't be a luxury only for rich children. David smiled, feeling more respect for Rosa than ever. Even when offered a chance to change her own life, her first thought was helping others. That's a beautiful idea, Rosa. I think my friends would be honored to contribute to something so meaningful. Rosa left. David sat in his music room, looking at the piano that had brought them together. He had bought it as a status symbol, but Rosa had shown him what it could really be, a bridge between hearts, a way to share beauty and hope with the world. Now he just had to wait and see if Rosa would find the courage to cross that bridge. Rosa spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about David's offer. She would lie in bed listening to Isabella's quiet breathing in the next room, her mind racing between fear and hope. The small apartment felt even smaller as she wrestled with the biggest decision she had faced since leaving Guatemala. On Wednesday evening, Rosa finally told Isabella the truth about her past. They sat together on their worn couch, sharing a simple dinner of rice and beans, when Rosa took a deep breath and began to speak. Mia, there are things about our life in Guatemala that I never told you. Things about who I used to be before we came here. Isabella, now 17 and preparing for college applications, looked up with curiosity. What kind of things, Mama? Rosa pulled out the small box she kept hidden under her bed. Inside were photographs, concert programs, and newspaper clippings yellowed with age. She spread them out on the coffee table, and Isabella's eyes grew wide as she studied the images. This is you? Isabella whispered, pointing to a photograph of Rosa in an elegant black gown, sitting at a grand piano on a concert stage. You look so different. I was a professional pianist, Isabella. I played with the National Symphony Orchestra. I gave concerts all over Central America. Music was my whole life before your father died. Isabella picked up each photograph carefully, as if they were precious artifacts. Mama, why didn't you ever tell me? This is incredible. You were famous. I didn't want you to feel sad about what we lost. I wanted you to focus on building a new life here, not missing the old one. Isabella looked at her mother with new eyes. Is this why you always seemed sad when we passed music stores? Is this why you sold our keyboard? Rosa nodded, tears forming. Every day I see pianos and remember who I used to be, but I thought that person was gone forever. But she's not gone, is she? Isabella said, understanding dawning on her face. She's still there. I hear you humming sometimes, and it's the most beautiful sound in the world. That night, Rosa called David and agreed to perform the concert. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rosa practiced every morning before her other cleaning jobs, spending hours at David's piano. Her fingers remembered the music better than she had hoped, though her endurance needed work. David arranged for the apartment to be cleaned by someone else during this time, insisting that Rosa focus entirely on her performance. David also introduced Rosa to his friend Christopher, a vocal coach who had worked with many professional musicians. Christopher was amazed by Rosa's natural ability and helped her choose the perfect program for the evening. You have something special? Christopher told her after their first session. Technical skill can be taught, but the emotional depth you bring to music, that's a gift you're born with. Rosa selected 5 pieces for her performance: a Bach prelude that showcased her classical training, 2 Chopin pieces that held special memories from Guatemala, a beautiful Spanish composition that honored her heritage, and finally a piece she had written herself years ago. inspired by the mountains of her homeland. As the concert date approached, Rosa's nerves grew stronger. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing, imagining all the ways the evening could go wrong. What if she forgot the music? What if her hands shook too much to play? What if David's wealthy friend saw right through her and realized she was just a maid pretending to be an artist? Isabella became her mother's strongest supporter. "Mama, you're not pretending to be anything. You are a pianist. You always were, even when you were cleaning houses. The music never left you." The night of the concert arrived with unseasonably warm weather for October. David had transformed his apartment into an intimate concert venue. The living room furniture had been rearranged to create seating for 30 guests. With the piano positioned where everyone could see Rosa clearly, soft lighting created a warm, welcoming atmosphere. And David had hired professional catering, so Rosa wouldn't have to worry about anything except her performance. Rosa arrived 2 hours early, wearing a simple but elegant black dress that Isabella had helped her choose from a consignment shop. Her hands were trembling as she sat at the piano for a final practice session. "Remember," David said gently, "these people are here because they love music. They want you to succeed." As guests began to arrive, Rosa watched from the music room. She saw well-dressed men and women who moved with the confidence that comes from wealth and education. These were people who attended the Metropolitan Opera and donated to Lincoln Center. They were used to hearing world-class musicians perform. Jennifer introduced herself to Rosa with genuine warmth. "David has told me wonderful things about your talent. I understand you're from Guatemala. My husband and I visited there last year. Such a beautiful country with such rich musical traditions." At 8 o'clock, David called for everyone's attention. Rosa's heart was beating so hard, she thought everyone might hear it. "Friends, thank you for joining me tonight for something very special. I want to introduce you to Rosa Morales, an extraordinarily talented pianist whose story embodies both the power of music and the strength of the human spirit." David briefly told Rosa's story, how she had been a professional musician in Guatemala, how circumstances had forced her to start over in a new country, and how she had continued to carry music in her heart even when she couldn't share it with the world. Tonight, Rosa returns to the concert stage, and all proceeds from your generous donations will go to Ward, providing musical instruments for schools that serve immigrant and low-income children. Music should be available to every child who has the passion to learn. Rosa walked to the piano on unsteady legs. She sat on the bench and looked out at the audience. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. These people were staring at her, waiting for her to prove she belonged here. Then she remembered Isabella's words, "The music never left you." Rosa placed her hands on the keys and began to play Bach's Prelude in C major. The first notes were tentative, but as the familiar melody flowed from her fingers, confidence returned. The music was still there, waiting patiently inside her, ready to be shared again. The Bach piece ended to appreciative applause, and Rosa felt some of her nervousness fade. She moved into the first Chopin piece, letting the emotional weight of the music carry her beyond her fears. As she played, she forgot about being nervous, forgot about being judged, forgot about everything except the joy of making music. The audience was completely silent, mesmerized by the depth of feeling in Rosa's performance. Several people leaned forward in their chairs, not wanting to miss a single note. David watched from the side of the room, amazed by the transformation he was witnessing. This was the real Rosa, not the quiet maid, not the frightened immigrant, but the artist she had always been. For her final piece, Rosa played the composition she had written herself. As the last notes faded away, the silence in the room seemed to stretch forever. Rosa sat with her hands in her lap, afraid to look up. Then the applause began. It started slowly, from one person, then another, until the entire room erupted in enthusiastic clapping. People rose to their feet, and the standing ovation continued for several minutes. Rosa looked up to see tears in many faces, and she felt her own eyes filling with emotion. After the formal performance ended, guests surrounded Rosa with congratulations and questions. A woman named Patricia, who ran a music foundation, pressed her business card into Rosa's hand. We need to talk about performance opportunities, she said. Real ones, at real venues. A man who owned several music schools wanted to discuss teaching positions. Another guest, who organized concerts at community centers, asked if Rosa would consider performing for underserved communities by the end of the evening. Rosa had received more than just applause. She had been offered 3 different performance opportunities to potential teaching positions and enough donations to buy instruments for over 100 children. But the most important moment came when Isabella arrived to pick up her mother. David had invited her to come at the end of the evening so she could see the impact of Rosé's performance. "Mama," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face, "I am so proud of you. You found your way back to who you really are." Her daughter tightly. "We found our way back, Mia. Together." 6 months later, Rosa performed her debut concert at a prestigious venue in Manhattan. The concert was sold out, and the review in the newspaper called her a pianist of extraordinary sensitivity and technical brilliance. David sat in the front row, beaming with pride, knowing that he had witnessed something magical, not just a talented musician returning to her calling, but a human being reclaiming her true identity. Rosa never stopped being grateful for her work as a maid, because it had taught her that dignity doesn't come from what job you do, but from how you do it. But she also never forgot that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to really see you for dreams to come alive again. The quiet woman who had once cleaned in silence had found her voice, and the world was better for it.